Good evening, my name is Stella Dimadis and welcome to Sheersha, the program that promotes women in the film and television industry, an initiative by Women in Film and Television Victoria and Channel 31. Tonight on Channel 31, we are thrilled to be celebrating International Women's Day by presenting 5 short films and their filmmakers from Deakin University and Women in Film and Television Victoria. Our first short film is She by Sheersha Perera. Welcome to Sheersha Perera, who has completed the film She. Thank you so much, Sheersha, for being on set today.
Thanks for having me, Stella. Thank you.
Welcome. She is an extraordinary film that comes from the heart. Tell me a little bit about where your heart was in making this film. I was
very much in a space where I wanted to explore the 3 cultures that I come from. I'm Sri Lankan, and I was raised in Kuwait, and now I've got my life very much deeply rooted in Melbourne, and it was just an exploration of the 3 cultures and the love of all 3 cultures. But mostly it was a celebration of being a female, being a woman, and the strengths that was passed on to me from my mother and my grandmother.
Both your mother and your grandmother obviously have had a really huge influence, and part of the film said, your grandma was saying she didn't want to be a woman, she wanted to be a man, but you, in showing this film, very much portrayed the beauty of being a woman, even within that sort of Sri Lankan culture.
Absolutely. See, that was something that my grandmother and I never saw eye to eye about, and as much as I tried to explain to her the strength that she's passed on to me in terms of being a woman is incredible, and I celebrate being a woman, and we could never see eye to eye about that because she constantly prayed to be born a man in her next life, and she felt limited. I never felt limited. I'm pretty much achieving all the goals I've set out to being a woman, and it's an incredible space for me to be a woman and do what I'm doing and celebrate every aspect of being a woman.
How did the audiences respond to She internationally?
It first got into St Kilda here, and it was a great experience, and then for 4 years it sat under my bed because I just didn't have any money to send it out to festivals. And then I actually got it into the French Film Festival arranged by the Alliance Française in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, and it was pretty much a dream after that. In Sri Lanka, the audience response was incredible. I was really nervous because it was home ground, and I was really nervous, basically portraying myself completely naked on the screen, and I was just kind of worried about what the backlash would be, but instead of having a negative response, it actually had a really positive response, and it resulted in a French producer who was part of the jury picking it up and taking it off to France and distributing it and entering into a whole heap of other festivals in Europe, and it did really well, and so I'm quite fortunate.
Where are you at the moment now with your filmmaking?
It's been 11 years, and 11 years is a long time between films, and I'd grown in many, many different ways. So my approach to my current film that we just wrapped up, and that was actually shot in Sri Lanka, so that was an amazing experience.
Tell us a little bit about Big Girl.
So Big Girl is basically about women exploring taboo subject matter and stepping out of the boundaries. Now, Big Girl comes from It's a title that's given to a young girl when she menstruates for the first time, and it's about a set of rules and regulations that comes with becoming a big girl, and mainly exploring the good Sri Lankan girl and the bad Sri Lankan girl, and kind of making it a space to understand it's okay to be a good Sri Lankan girl, but it's okay to be a bad Sri Lankan girl. And by that, what I mean is, being a good Sri Lankan girl means being subservient. Being a bad Sri Lankan girl is stepping out of that.
Thank you so much, Sheersha, for coming on our show this evening. It's been wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much, Stella. It's been an absolute pleasure and an absolute honour to be here with you all.
Thank you. Coming up next, we've got Taryn and Jessica from our 2 short films, Microwave Minute and How to Desexualise a Woman. With us, we have Jessica Batsas and Taryn Logan, our 2 filmmakers of the short films Microwave Minute and How to Desexualise a Woman. Welcome, girls. How are you this evening?
Good, thank you.
Good, thank you. Thanks, Stella.
Fantastic. These short films are very short. How long is your Microwave Minute, Taryn?
It goes for 1 minute and 40 seconds.
That's short. And yours?
Minute 20.
1 minute and 20. Now, they're both very experimental. Tell us a little bit about Microwave Minute, Taryn.
It kind of explores the ideas of how long a minute can feel and what can happen in a minute.
That's fantastic, and I want to expand upon that and talk about that a little bit more. And with How to Desexualise a Woman, just a little background on that as well.
The film was made in response to a 1970s experimental film called We Aim to Please, which was made by Margot Nash and Robin Laurie. And so my film was sort of in a response to that, trying to challenge the ideas of how women were perceived on screen, and as a woman filmmaker, how I put women on screen.
Definitely, and very different in the 70s to how women are perceived or even represented at the moment in screen. So let's have a look now at Microwave Minute and How to Desexualise a Woman. So tell me about the sound in both of these films, because when you are creating an experimental film, it's it's really important to have the visuals to be very strong, but sound has to be really powerful too. And with Microwave Minute, I kind of felt that there was a bit of war going on. There was, I sensed that. How did that come about for your film?
The initial idea for Microwave Minute was that I was going to film something in a microwave for a minute. That was it. But I came home and I just put the microwave on for 60 seconds and just stood there and just sort of thought, and I guess that kind of just came to me. I was just sort of thinking about what can happen in a minute and what can happen, on the other side of the world whilst you're waiting for your meal to heat up.
Yeah, so there was a reference to, I guess, what other people and cultures are going through.
And everything that's going on in the world.
Now, your film, How to Desexualise a Woman, is based on Margot Nash's award-winning film from 1978?
Yes, that's correct. We Aim to Please.
We Aim to Please. And what aspects of that film did you incorporate into yours?
One of the main ideas that comes across in Nash's film is these women, it was the first time they'd made a film together, and they were trying, I guess, to just challenge everything they knew about filmmaking, especially like everything about the male gaze, how women got put on screen. Women generally weren't ever behind the camera. They used to call themselves insurrectionaries and anarchists, and so I just sort of took that idea and I wanted to, I guess, make everyone feel uncomfortable. And it was one of the main things I got when we all had to screen our films for our peers. And I found the most fascinating feedback I got was from my male peers, because it was like they had to stop thinking about me as their friend Jess at uni and just sort of watch the film for what it was and let themselves feel uncomfortable and think that maybe I was, I'm implicit in that.
An audience becomes another extension in a lot of ways to your film, doesn't it? And so Microwave Minute screened 22 times in White Night, during the White Night.
I had the whole audience like clapping for me, which they hadn't done for any of the other films, because I sat down and waited for mine to show. And then I sat down and watched it a second time, and there was sort of the same lot of people. And I think, you know, the second time round you think something different. So yeah, it was really interesting to see the reaction. I was not expecting that at all.
Excellent. And are you working on anything at the moment?
Not currently. Are you?
At the moment. What I'd like to do is, most of the work that I've sort of been doing since uni has been on short films, like narrative films, but I actually really want to be doing like more sort of large scale, like experimental films. I really enjoy doing
Okay, and maybe getting the public involved in a little bit more sort of public work, which would be interesting to say. Well, look, thank you so much for being in the studio this evening. It's been great to listen to both perspectives, and also to see films that were very, you know, very short, and sort of to be able to gauge some of that impact. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
having
Stella.
us.
Coming up next, we'll be meeting the writer of Mr. Wasinski's song that won the 2001 MIF Award for Best Australian Short. Welcome, Nova. It certainly is an honour to have a writer here with us today. Now, tell us a little bit about Mr. Wasinski's song and where you got the inspiration for that.
I'd written a short story called The Gauze Canal, which was in sort of reaction to a class exercise I did with my lecturer at Melbourne University when I was studying screenwriting. And it was Anna Kokonos, and she had this idea that if we learnt to write using only one element of film, then we'd write really interesting stories. So I wrote The Gauze Canal as an exercise about sound, I guess. And then we decided we wanted to put in for some funding, and I adapted it to a short film, and we got funding. So,
how long did it take you to develop and work on Mr. Wasinski's song?
So I wrote the short story, and then I wrote a first draft of the script, and I would have written about 5 drafts of that screenplay, I think. Like it was really developed up because it needed a story arc and a narrative without, he hasn't got anyone to talk to, there's hardly any dialogue, and it's a very interior film, I guess. But to try and dramatise an interior film requires a lot of sort of, just a lot of work, I think.
It was very well received.
Yeah.
What awards did it win?
It won Best Short at MIF, Best Australian Short, and I was nominated for an Augie for the screenplay. And it won a Sound Award at St Kilda, and then we screened it at London Film Festival and Berlin and Singapore, and we got to go. So we travelled with it, which was seeing it in Berlin, particularly because it is about a Polish man, and because there's no dialogue, you can screen it internationally, and it has the same sort of appeal regardless of whether or not you can understand English. So that was pretty amazing seeing it at Berlin.
Well, definitely having international audiences be able to appreciate it, that's amazing.
Yeah,
it's great work. Let's have a look at one of those scenes.
Okay.
In seeing the film, were there any surprises for you from writing it to what actually eventuated?
I think that I never had any real idea of what it was going to look like. I think I'm not a filmic screenwriter, I don't think. I think I write tone and I write character, but I don't think I think necessarily filmically. So I was surprised at how emotionally powerful it was, and I think that was to do with Bruce Kerr's pretty extraordinary performance, and the direction. Like, I think the sort of emotional direction was quite beautiful. So I guess that was a big surprise for me.
And you're writing for young people now?
Yeah, young adults, which is fantastic, I must say. I love writing for, so I do a lot of work at schools, a lot of school visits. Trying to crack what appeals to a 14, 15, 16-year-old is such a challenge.
So what themes are you exploring in some of these novels that you are writing for young people?
I guess friendship is pretty important. Class is something I'm really interested in Australia, and the book I wrote last year, Frankie and Jolie, was about two best female friends and how their friendship kind of survives falling in love with the same boy. So, but about class and about motherhood and about absent mothers, and yeah, so quite different to the sort of stories that I was writing when I was working in film, I think.
How are you navigating all of this space now with writing?
At the moment, I have a book coming out in April that's for middle grade, so 10 to 12-year-olds, and it's very filmic, and I've been in conversation with the producer about adapting that to a screenplay for a family feature, because I think that probably is an arena in Australia that I'd be quite interested in working in, just off the back of films like Paper Planes and Oddball, where there is obviously a market for Australian stories on the big screen for kids.
How would you like to see writers navigate this area where they are a little bit more involved in the production process, but also legally a little bit more involved with the rights of whatever it is that they're writing and developing?
I think that there's been a kind of weird, or there was a weird trend in Australia when I started out to the auteur, which I think did a lot of writers a disservice, because I think it meant that we couldn't have a very specific craft that we owned and that was ours, and I think a lot of directors just assumed that they could write. So I think there was a kind of weird blurring of those roles, and I think it's really important that we see writing as a very specific craft, and that while I don't want to go on the shoot and I don't want to have a say in, you know, how it's directed or how it's edited, because I don't think that's my role, I think our role as writers needs to be taken seriously, and particularly in television. I think it's very hard in television in Australia to have real ownership over your work.
How much more involvement would you like to see writers on set?
Maybe not necessarily on set, but I just think that the script is given, that it becomes quite a sacred sort of piece of work, I guess, and that it is the blueprint for what is filmed, and I think there needs to be some credit given to that. That said, my experiences on both the short films that I did was lovely, and there was never I never felt like I didn't have a role. But definitely compared to working in publishing, where the author is given an enormous amount of power, it's a different beast, I guess, working in film and television.
Who inspires you?
Women, I think. Specifically, there is a bunch of young adult novelists in Australia, Simone Howe, Kath Crowley. They're writing books that are strong and brave and taking risks, and they definitely inspire me, I think.
Is there a film that you wish that you had made?
I wish that I'd made The Babadook, because about 5 years before that film came out, I wrote a horror film about motherhood, and it sort of came through Film Victoria a couple of times, and I could never quite get it right, and then that came out and I was terribly jealous that she'd nailed it.
It's been excellent having you on our program tonight. Thank you so much, Nova.
Thanks, Stella, it was great.
After the break, the last film of this evening, Car Lady and Bike Girl. Welcome back. In the studio, we have Maria Theodorakis, the writer-director of Car Lady and Bike Girl. Maria, welcome.
Hi, Stella. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. How did you come about to make Car Lady and Bike Girl? Because it was shot in Canada, so this is a little different to some of the other filmmakers.
Yeah, I was living in Canada, in Toronto, for a while, and I wrote it really in response to what I expected Toronto to be, which I thought it was going to be a really incredibly equitable society. You know, they have extraordinary healthcare, they have extraordinary education. And so I was quite shocked when I saw people living in the snow, the homelessness, and then at the same time seeing incredibly rich aspects of Toronto as well, you know, Toorak times 100. And so it was that level, and then there was the other level of meeting fantastic artists in Toronto, particularly one, Cale Chernin, who plays my car lady, and wanting to write it for her, really. So the first thing I did was I wrote it for her and gave it to her to see what she thought, and she really loved it, so it went from there.
And at that time, were you living in a type of artistic, creative hub in Toronto?
Which again was one of the reasons that I was supported to make Car Lady and Bike Girl. And that's because I was living in a warehouse surrounded by artists. My DOP was down the hallway. You know, the sound person was down the other hallway. There was a lighting guy at the front of the building. There was a casting person. There was a caterer. You know, people who could make the film, and the proximity to the place just made it easier.
Well, it all came together nicely. It's a great little film.
Thank you.
Let's watch it now. Car Lady and Bike Girl.
Quarter past. Continuing. And this, another day of above average temperature.
Women in Film and Television Victoria and RMIT are banding together this year on the 10th of March for an International Women's Day screening at 6 p.m. at Collide Theatre. Be sure to join. Back with more after the break. Welcome back. In the studio we have Maria Theodorakis, the writer-director of Car Lady and Bike Girl. Maria, you really developed the characters in Car Lady and Bike Girl. Now, you are very interested in how that happens for a filmmaker.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I am interested in exploring is subverting expectations of how we perceive people. So writing characters that we think we know, putting them up on the screen, and then subverting them somehow.
And the difficulty also that you incorporate in your films is that you also bring in a comedic element to them too.
Yeah, I don't see it as a difficulty. I see it more as that's where I tend to gravitate towards. Yeah. I think that if comedy can be used to bring characters together and also bring an audience closer to the characters, and I gravitate towards it and I just groove towards it and I write it that way or I direct it that way.
And it doesn't matter how it happens, whether it's comedic or drama, as long as you feel that you're able to draw, you know, certain aspects of that character out?
Yeah, I mean, but I write very much with a comedic, I guess, intent. Also, the actors that I choose also have a really great comic sensibility and understanding.
With writing, have you always written? Is this something you've always done?
Yes, yes. I've always written, and at the beginning of my career, after I got out of college, I was writing and directing and acting, but all three in theatre. But then, you know, acting opportunities came up and I just went down that road, and now I find myself back in the writing, directing, but more in the television and film world.
It's exciting that you got funding recently. What was that for?
We had received Film Victoria funding to write 2 episodes with the intent of a television series, and Film Victoria supported us with that, which was wonderful. So we sort of understood that process, and then going into the Screen Australia multi-platform funding, we were kind of, I guess, in a way ahead of the game because we had gone through the other funding process. I think once you've done one funding proposal, you're a bit more savvy, and every time you're a bit quicker in the way that you write, in the way that you formulate your project. But at the end of the day, the idea, I think, won it over, and we were very lucky that we had a fantastic trailer.
Tell us a little bit about Little Acorns.
It's a workplace comedy, and it's set in a childcare centre where the adults behave more like children than the children. So it's really an opportunity to explore female characters that are authentic in that they are, you know, the dominant gender when it comes to looking after children in the, you know, the domestic world and in the, you know, the childcare world. So these women are incredibly professional, incredibly loving towards their charges, towards the babies and the children, but behind the scenes they're, you know, dickheads.
Yep, yep.
And this allows us to write women that are more fully formed, because you can have that contrast within you. You can be the professional woman, but also be the dickhead. Really, we're running a show about female dickheads.
As a writer, how much of your own personal experience do you bring into that?
Oh, what do you mean, Stella? Are you calling me a dickhead?
No.
No, honestly, I am. And one of the things that we said we had to do a pitch to camera for Screen Australia, because I don't think they wanted us to go in the building. And, you know, we did this whole thing about, you know, allowing women the opportunity to be dickheads as much as men seem to just be allowed to be dickheads all the time. You know, the eye rolling that we're relegated to is really boring. We want to do the stupid antics.
How many lead actors do you have that are women?
Well, it's an ensemble cast. Emily Tahini is our lead, but she really is I guess the beacon in amongst the insanity. She is. We've got a fabulous comedian in Emily Tahini playing the straight role. But there's 7 all up, and there's 1 guy. And that's part of the rub for our show.
So that's a little different. Where are you at with that?
We're in pre-production. We are filming at the end of March, and we hope to have it online by May. They're 3 to 5 minute snack type of comedy moments, an oasis for people to have a bit of a laugh during the day, really.
And in terms of programming and scheduling online, is that going to be weekly? Are we going to be able to enjoy the web series, the episodes, or...?
We're going to put it all up online. So if people want to watch one, they can. If people want to watch all of them, they can.
So it'll be just the whole lot?
The whole lot will be up online.
I'm really looking forward to that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria, for being here tonight. It's been wonderful to have a chat with you.
Thanks, Stella.
That is the end of our show. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Women in Film and Television Victoria, Channel 31 and Deakin University. If you'd like to have a chat with us, we're online right now. Join us on our Facebook page, Sheersha, and we look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Until next time, I'm Stella Dimadis, and good night.